welcome everybody to today's Business Leaders. This is a really, really special episode for me for a couple reasons. The less important reason is I've never recorded my podcast outside, but Doug said he would be my first victim. But the actual reason that this is a really special show for me is because Doug is somebody, he is probably my longest time friend. I was going to say oldest friend, but we've known each other for 30 plus years. And he's somebody that's just been super significant in my life from when I was young, when we started playing guitar together, to just a lot of times when I was in my early teens and late teen years. Doug has been a father figure to me, and I was always doing entrepreneurial stuff, so pretty early on I'd have to really look back to figure out when we started meeting about business, but Doug has also been my business coach and mentor for years. He's somebody that I just really admire and respect. He's just such a significant person in my life. And this year, we are doing legendary leaders on today's Business Leaders, and I consider you to be a legendary leader. So I super appreciate you sitting down and talking and being willing to share all the amazing things that we've had for decades now with some folks that may get to watch this. I appreciate you, Doug.
Hey, thanks, Gabe. Glad to be part of this. It is amazing when I think about our journey over 3 decades now.
It's wild.
I'm like, is that right?
I've known you for 30 plus years.
I know.
I can't think of any. I mean, besides a couple of my siblings are finally 30 years old. Besides siblings, I don't know who else I've known that long.
I was thinking about that the other day, or times when you and I meet to talk business, but we've talked well beyond business many times.
Yeah.
And that's been a lot of fun for it. And it's been great to see your success over these years. And not that it came without some difficulties.
A little bit.
Right, but the journey and how you've moved forward even under tough circumstances. And so I've really enjoyed our time together, and now meeting with some of the members of your team at BME, so that's been really cool too. Yeah.
So I want to take this opportunity to ask you things that I never think to ask, because we're always either talking about what song we're playing or what we're listening to or what business we're doing or all the fun stuff we fuss with. But give me a little backstory about kind of like where you grew up, like maybe your origin story to where I met you, because I mean, I was probably 10 years old or something. I don't know, somewhere in that range. I don't remember exactly. It was 9, 10 years old probably, it feels like.
Right, that's probably right.
So, but tell me about what led you up to your career to that point, because we ended up meeting where I went to church back when I was a kid, and that's how we started playing guitar and doing youth group stuff and all the leadership stuff, because we'll get into leadership, but I just tell me a little bit more about your childhood, because I've heard bits and pieces over the years, but tell me about from there to like Avery to Progressive maybe, or stuff like that.
So I was born in Cleveland, Euclid, a suburb of Cleveland, and my family, my parents had lived in Cleveland, in fact, inner city Cleveland, for years and years back in the day. And so, and in 4th grade, probably was starting from childhood, I moved from 4th grade to a rural town called Russell, Ohio, and we were thrilled because instead of having a postage stamp property, we had a couple acres, and my 2 brothers and eventually 2 sisters had, playing sports. I remember my dad and us playing baseball, football, you name it, for years and years. A lot of injuries along the way, of course, but my dad's philosophy was, hey, walk it off. So I don't want to hear you complain, just walk it off. So we joke, my brothers and I joke about that, but that's how he approached it. So we lived there for really all the way through high school. And
I think I did waterproofing at your dad's house. I'm just remembering now. Yeah. So
and then your brother Amos also came later to work on something. I forgot what.
That's awesome.
And both things turned out good. So
well, that's good.
But you're right. So so once, probably in I think I was in 8th grade, I had an interest in music. Rock was one of my interests, and so I started playing guitar. And at first I fussed around on my own, and then tried to find friends that knew more than me. And then finally I went for lessons, and my mom was a professional pianist for years and knew a ton of music, probably more than I'll ever know, and how to do stuff very creatively on the fly within a song. And so she connected me with a place called DeSimone School of Music in Solon, Ohio, not far from where I live. And my brother was there as well, taking drum lessons.
Nice.
And so that's where the instruction was fantastic, because it was a combination of music theory and learning songs to play. Because one of the things I find, even now that I do lessons myself, is people get bored with music theory in about 5 minutes. But on the other hand, I always say, hey, you don't want to be an ignorant musician. You want to know what you're doing.
Yep.
And so, and I know there's exceptions to it, fantastic professionals that learn that way, but I think that's 1% of the population.
Yeah, that's a hard way to grow and excel in that skill.
So it worked out good. So I was there a few years, and that's what I learned the most. And then after that, just got involved in every kind of, I would play at church all the time. I'd play out anytime I could. And that goes back to the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so eventually I started learning stuff, how to do stuff, and really played out anytime I could, wherever it was. Even in college, played, and either would be in a band or playing for an event or something like that. And so that was definitely love. In high school, I was not a great student. I was probably thinking more about after high school, even though I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But the philosophy was, hey, you need to go to college no matter what, because you'll probably get a better job, and it's a good thing. So I
think
went,
it applied back then. I think you did get a better job going to college 30 years ago than now, potentially.
So I started as an engineering student because my dad was an engineer, and did not do well with that. Just didn't. And so my grades were not great. But then my dad suggested, I'll never forget, he says, well, why don't you look into business management, business administration? And I did, and I made the dean's list the next quarter.
Wow, that's a big shift.
Yeah.
Good suggestion.
And I just found it fascinating. I was just intrigued by producing products and cost and manufacturing, you name it. And I don't know, it just came to me, and that really shifted my whole focus. So I graduated with an undergrad in business management. And then I liked it so much, I went and got a master's at a local college, university, in business administration. And I was just really into it, and studying became easy compared to what it was early on. And so out of that, when I graduated, we were in Missouri. My wife and I, we got married in 1979, and so we were in Missouri, and I got a job really to a local company where we live now, probably an hour on the west side of Ohio. And so the HR manager was a friend, one of my buddies in high school, and I remember that, so I called him, and worked out. And I went in as a workflow scheduling analyst early on. That was my first job out of college into the real world. And so after I was there a few years, and after I got my master's, that certainly was a personal marketing thing for me.
Yeah.
And so I joined this company called Avery, made pressure sensitive labels. They eventually became Avery Dennison, acquired the Dennison Manufacturing Company, and were international, even had operations in Europe and other places. So that I went into operations, and it was all about operating costs, productivity. In this case, you had these large printing machines that would produce pressure-sensitive rolls that were about 8 feet wide and thousands of yards long, and then eventually that you get printed out of those. Yeah. Competing with 3M in a lot of markets, no question. So I was there 16 years. Eventually became director of operations for one of the major divisions, and loved it. It was a lot of day-to-day stuff, but I just loved that part of it.
Yeah.
And so after that, actually, I took kind of a side swing where I was very active in our church, as you know, as a youth pastor and as an elder for years. And so I felt I wanted to do that full time. So I became an associate pastor at a church, and eventually became director of an inner city non-for-profit group in Cleveland.
Was it you or Youth for Christ?
Youth for Christ.
Yeah.
Youth for Christ, which was started by Billy Graham, actually, back in the day.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's interesting where you have these local chapters, and the idea is you're trying to reach at-risk kids that are known to have some challenges. Yeah. And so the platform, the operating platform, was typically you were trying to do events in local high schools. So we would sponsor anti-drug events, assemblies, and those allowed us to be under the ground with any religious
under
pushback.
the guise of doing just drug stuff.
So when you say, hey, we want to come in and talk to your students about anti-drugs, anti-violence, boom,
You're in.
You're in, and especially with inner city, where there's a lot of challenges. And we also did that in rural areas, but I found that the inner city was much easier to get approval to go into the schools because they have a lot of challenges. Yeah. The administration staff at inner city Cleveland schools welcomed any opportunity
to get some help. Yeah.
And so we had this one school in Cleveland we would go to frequently. It was so large, I had 4 principals of the school.
Wow.
And there were, dozens of different dialects spoken. Spanish was very popular. And so I remember we would go at lunchtime and hang out with the kids and stuff. And I remember one time we were there hanging out with kids. We were promoting an assembly or a after-school thing we were going to do.
Yeah.
And often we would also do events with the Indians or the Cavaliers, and then we would speak afterwards with our message, and that's how we drew kids in. And we were at the lunchroom. In this case, it's a high school, and I noticed there were armed guards. They had metal detectors, and this was back in the early 2000s, so you could not get in.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting with some students just promoting our after-school thing. All of a sudden I hear a policeman yell, "Stop!" And apparently someone was trying to escape the school and get out.
Oh my God.
And in those schools, they require uniforms because it's easier to tell who's a student or not.
Yeah.
So long story short, they apprehended him. They caught him before he got out of school. And for the students, they're like, yeah, that happens fairly often. So, And to me, it was like, oh my gosh, that seemed pretty intense.
Yeah.
We did assembly there another time, that same school, and there was a fight that broke out, and somebody said something evidently in the gymnasium, and now we have a fight, and that got under control. Anyways, what I liked about, what drew me to it was, it was reality. These are students that have very difficult home lives, if any at all. Statistics at that time said that 50% to 75% of all those students attending had one parent at the most, or they did not even have their own parent. They had a grandmother or a grandfather. And now you start to see the challenges of the home life.
Yeah.
And so that drew me because I felt it was reality, and we felt like we were making a difference in that case. So I did that for, between that and associate pastor, for about 5 years. And then I joined Progressive Insurance Company, and really was involved with their call centers. My sister and brother-in-law worked there with great comments about how good the company was, and so I worked in a couple roles there. I was a supervisor initially, and I had already had a couple of supervisory jobs in other roles up to that point, and I wanted operations management, operations leadership, so I did that. Eventually got promoted to managing all the scheduling for the call centers, all the staffing decisions and those, and just retired from there after about 16 and a half years.
Yeah.
And great company. Both companies were fantastic. Tons of training for leadership, and very moral, ethical operations. Big companies. I wasn't necessarily a fan of a big company, but they operate fantastic. And so I owe a lot of that development to both those companies.
Yeah. I've always heard they're a phenomenal company, and it's funny to me, like another good friend of mine, who I'll probably have on the show soon too, he worked like a mile from my house in Hunting Valley. I figured out, like, he worked there for a while.
Okay.
Worked for another property there, and you'd talk about Youth for Christ. My dad was in Youth for Christ.
Yes, that's right.
But long before I met you, or before we went to the same church.
Yeah.
And then I got to work for Renwick, I think.
Okay.
CEO of Progressive.
Glenn Renwick.
Renwick.
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of stonework at his house.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And he's a super cool guy.
Yeah.
But it's just funny. Like, it's always funny to me, the stories cross over like that.
It's, what's funny about that is now he's since retired, and then Tricia Griffiths has been CEO and done an unbelievable job. She's been ranked top CEO in the Cleveland area and other areas. Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And but Glenn, I'll never forget, I was on a project, and we would meet early, and different people with different functions, and we meet early in the morning and then eventually start the project.
Yeah.
So we're sitting in just a small conference room, maybe holds a dozen people. So in walks Glenn.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be we were going to interview him for his thoughts on the business, what was going on.
Right.
And it was funny because the group was like, how do we react? Here's the CEO.
Yeah.
So we said hi, but most people were pretty quiet. I think we're intimidated, but he's a very open guy.
Yeah, he seems super approachable.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't interact with him a ton, but I talked to him and his wife a couple times.
Absolutely. It's even a story about Tricia Griffiths. Here it is, Progressive, now 50,000 employee company.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, it was a number of years ago. We got to talking, and I was on another project with her, and every now and then I see her. Well, we did somehow my daughter sent me a note, my daughter's a professor at Illinois State, and said, hey, I hear that Tricia Griffiths is coming to talk on leadership at our university.
Yeah.
So I emailed Tricia, not expecting a response. I said, hey, my daughter, blah, 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 she's going to attend, and that sounds really good. So she sends me a note back, which by itself is amazing.
Yeah.
And then says, well, tell her to stay after the show. I want to meet her. And I said, really? So
That's awesome.
I told my daughter that. So then she attended the seminar, which was awesome. And after the show, you know, the local media's there, all this stuff. So my daughter waited in line. And as soon as she saw my daughter, she hugged her. And they talked for about 10 minutes. And my daughter was so excited about the fact she even would spend the time.
Yeah.
And so I emailed her back. I said, that was amazing. And that goes a long way when you have somebody at that level that reaches out like that. So that was a blast, though.
Yeah, talking about good leadership. Like, I think, you know, I've worked with thousands of companies over the years, and it's the ones that have effective, intentional leadership in place. There's no stopping them, and the ones that don't pay attention to leadership or don't take the time to take care of the people that work with them, of course, things fall apart.
Right.
And I think I always think about, like, we could talk about the music stuff we've done for a long time. We'll do another episode on that. But I always think about the first John Maxwell book that we went through, the 21 Laws of Leadership.
Yes.
And I must have been driving, but I'm not sure. I was like 15 or 16, I feel like. Okay. Because Matt and Mike did that.
That's right.
And that was like the first time that anybody had introduced the concept of leadership to me. Like, I mean, obviously it's happening all the time, all around us all the time. But it was like right at that same time that, for whatever reason, I started reading the Toyota Way about manufacturing and like process, and it never occurred to me until we're having this conversation that's why we get along so well, because all I think about is like, what's the system, what's the process, how are we going to break that down? Like, that's the same way I think.
Right.
But when you layer on effective leadership into anything, it's a game changer. So, one, I'm curious about like kind of when your interest was piqued about leadership, because that's I think your greatest skill is like you're always fussing with leadership and looking at how do I lead in the situation, whether it's you know, family stuff or church or business or anything's going on. And I'm curious kind of like where you started fussing with that, and then what led that to be like, oh, I'm gonna ask these three guys if they want to do a leadership book with me. I forget how we got there, but kind of tell me a little bit about that stuff.
You know, it's interesting. Going out of high school, I was always so envious of my friends. They seemed to know what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
I did not. I didn't have a clue. That probably contributed to my struggle early on at college.
Yeah.
But one of the things I noticed, I had a part-time job in college, and I was a bellman at Howard Johnson's motel. And it was in the town I was in Missouri, it was a large one that did all kinds of conventions. And so one of the roles I had, along with a number of other guys and gals, was to set up for these banquets. All the tables, chairs, and if they need a platform, all that stuff.
Right.
And this dawned on me. After doing that for about a year, I noticed that without even thinking, I was coordinating stuff. I'd say, hey, Bill, you know what? Why don't we get the tables from the back? Let's set them up in an L shape. And I noticed I was doing that more and more, and people were listening to it. And so I wasn't being forceful. I just did what I thought, hey, we need some coordination. Nobody else was stepping up.
Right.
Even my boss I reported to often wasn't sure what to do. And I said, gosh, that seems to come natural. Does that mean I'm a natural leader?
Yeah.
Or does it mean I just want to be a leader? Probably some of both.
Yeah.
And so that's what piqued me early on. At the same time, I was taking those business courses. And my dad was a general manager of a manufacturing company for years. And I actually worked at that company for a couple of years. And I noticed his style. He was a very interpersonal kind of person. The way he communicated, very bright, often probably tolerated people not as bright, but kept them engaged.
Yep.
And so that was one of the things I noticed was his example. And he wasn't preaching leadership to me. He was just showing
Living it out. Yep.
And so then the other thing was that first job I got when I started at Avery Dennison, there was a facility manager. I'll never forget his style. His communication skills were so clean. It's like, gosh, he said in about 2 seconds what took me 10 minutes, and I was not as clear. And I just remember thinking, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
I want to be someone that you can trust. I have total confidence in what he's saying. He asks the right questions. He's not a pushover guy that agrees with everybody, but he just. And I said, I want to be like that too. So I started collecting these examples, because at the same time, my direct manager of that situation was a bull in a china shop. He was, we're going to do it my way, and we're going to do it now, whatever it is. And so what I noticed was, so I noticed that the result of that, even on me, is like, well, I'm not that motivated to follow somebody that's just barking at me,
Yeah.
or that I feel like I can't give any input to. He was effective. I will admit, one of the things I took away from that was he could make stuff happen big time. And so I like that. I said, that's what I want to do. But the way he did it, I felt like there were casualties along the way. And so I kind of took both those guys, because the next guy up level was the one I mentioned earlier, that his communication style was great. So I started collecting these examples of, boy, I want to be more like that, or I want to be less like that, and started just building that into my leadership style. Kind of subtly over, you get a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. If you haven't, then you probably have not got any real experience, because it can't all be upside. And you have some hard lessons that you say, boy, if I do that again, I'm going to approach it differently. And probably the biggest learning that I still have today is when change happens in an organization, whether it's the industry forcing that, or the CEO forcing it, or it's whether you want to initiate, you just have to really think about how's that going to roll out, how does it impact the various parts of the organization. And I had a professor who used to say, slow down and fast forward. And I really think it meant, hey, before you go launching into this thing and create some self-inflicted problems, think through who needs to be involved. What does that change look like for someone who wasn't involved in the discussion but now has to implement the change? And that's a tough lesson. But it went opposite of my normal behavior, because I like to move fast on stuff. But I realized, you know what, if you take a little time up front, you're going to get there faster and better, and people will buy in and not feel like they're
being drug along.
Exactly.
And I think there's, when you say that, it just reminds me, like, the amount of intentional communication that has to be involved in leadership is, I think communication is probably the number one skill for a leader. And then you do need to have a plan. But like, we all have ideas and plans, like, so that doesn't seem as challenging maybe. And like, obviously strategic planning is a big piece of that, but I still, I mean, I would say 2 or 3 times this year, and we've talked about communicating and letting people know what's coming, and like, like the John Maxwell book, we can talk about in a minute, like the story about how he goes and tries to pitch something and it gets shut down, and then he goes around and does his leadership work, and then he pitches it and it works.
Right.
But even 2 times this year, I had to go back to a team member and say, man, I apologize. Like, I just didn't even keep you up to date on, you know, what I was thinking. I just rolled into it. And man, that's something that I think is so easy to overlook, no matter how many years you've been doing it. And that's something that that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from that book. When we think about, like, that's really interesting that's how you learn leadership, because today it's a big topic, like, and maybe it was back then too, I don't know, but like, talk about a way to actually learn on the job in the good way of, like, observational, like, awareness like that, I think is so underrated, and I think it's something we all need to talk about more as leaders, because it's the best way to learn is learn from other people's experiences. And it's a lot. There's less bumps. You're still going to have lots of bumps, but there's probably less when you go that route. When did you end up hearing about John Maxwell, and then what inspired you to be like, hey, I'm going to take these 3 knuckleheads and see if I can teach them leadership?
Well, I think some of that was rooted when I was youth pastoring, when I met you and Matt and Mike, and a couple things. I noticed in youth ministry especially, if the students don't think you're genuine, they will eat you up fast. And so my love for students was easy, because I was just, for some reason, I liked being around teens and the struggles, and maybe my own struggles I had. And so to me, that said, I want to invest in those folks. And I think that's where it started, actually, because I felt like, and I'm sure there's exceptions, but I felt like the youth groups that we had over the years, I did that for 12 years or so, students could tell I was interested in them.
You were authentic, legitimate, and didn't give us any crap answers about like some made-up answer. This is like you would say if you didn't know, or you were always honest with us for sure.
So to me that came easy. Some people said, "Oh, that must have been tough." No, that was easy, because for some reason God made me a person that liked that. So that started. Then the other thing I noticed was with you and Mike and Matt, very high initiative in general. I guess it's tough. I said, these are guys that want to go somewhere. And that's what planted the seed. I said, you know what, I wonder One is, you remember in those youth settings, I noticed that if you have people engaged, this was back in the 90s, 1990s, if you have students engaged, they'll keep coming back.
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
don't, they'll come back only if there's some fun event we're doing. you know?
Right.
And
There's
I
enough
wasn't.
free pizza and
Yeah,
pop.
yeah, right. And my goal was, I want to change the direction around if they're in the wrong direction,
Yeah.
not entertain them, and that's it.
Right.
So I remember I was always into reading stuff, whether it was the 7 Highly Effective People, any of these
Yeah.
books I would look at. And in some cases, the company I was in would promote it. In some cases, I said, well, there's got to be more stuff about this. And that's when the John Maxwell started for me, probably in the 90s. Even the 24 irrefutable laws that we went through
Yeah.
is so relevant today. And so as I read, if you ever read a book and said, well, the title sounded good, but I'm just not connecting. In this case, I read it, I said, that is so accurate.
Yeah.
The way he described the hierarchy of leadership, and when you're leading an organization, it's so much different than all about title of what you're in.
Yeah.
Early on, you're thinking title. Oh,
Right.
I got to be the general manager. I got to be the top
CEO
guy.
or whatever, yeah.
But you come to find out 2 things. One, you can have the greatest title in the world. Doesn't mean people are going to follow you.
Exactly.
And the other thing, good leadership or influential leadership crosses over both ways. You look at Adolf Hitler. He was a tremendous leader, a horrible result, but he got a lot of people.
He was a leader.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that was a learning for me, that you can influence
Yeah.
people one way or another. And so that impacted me. I said, well, I want to influence people. I don't want to just boss them around and that's it.
Right.
And so I learned that, boy, if you got people engaged in the youth group situation, they're going to come back and eventually they could start being a part of it. And so you, Mike, and Matt, I remember you started helping me with stuff. And so one, it was selfishly, it was helping me.
Yeah,
and
that's
2,
good.
you were getting a feel for what it takes to administrate
Yeah.
change like that.
Yep.
And so those things became kind of the grinding thought in my mind and heart was, man, I want to be an effective leader. I'm learning the hard way that you can't just get a title and call it a day, or you're not going to last long.
Yeah.
And plus, I wouldn't want to be treated that way myself, because I had the same experience when I was a teen, where I had some leaders it didn't connect.
Right.
And so, but then I also had some, both in the church world and in the secular world, that were incredible good examples for me. And so I'd kind of take behavioral pieces and said, I want that piece as part of my leadership. Communication, or someone who could stay calm under pressure, someone who could get something done efficiently without trampling the organization. And so those became, I would think about that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But that's how I thought of U3, and you guys soaked it up so much. And to me, it was a lot of fun, because I was
a
learning
blast,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah. As a teacher, you learn as much as you're teaching as the students do. And so that became fun for me. And the 3 of you became super successful over the years. And so I look back at those times as that was so awesome.
Yeah.
Hard to believe that was at least 25 years ago, I guess. I don't know. And that's why I still think the John Maxwell stuff is still relevant.
Yeah.
So-
I feel like he was such an early pioneer in this space. And
Yeah.
I mean, he's written 100 books now, or
Yeah.
like some
Some
ludicrous
crazy
amount.
number. Yeah.
And I remember, I haven't read the book in a while. I'm sure I have it sitting somewhere on the shelf, but
Yeah.
I remember a couple things. One, yeah, your title doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Which I think that's always the fastest indicator for me of a real leader, because I have, Danielle on our team at BME, she's had every title. She's worked in different departments.
right.
Like she came in as trying to be my executive assistant. I was like, whoa, you're not good at that. But I could just tell there was something, something we joke about that all the time. It was like, good thing we found something else for you to do. But like to this day, I could say, I know I could go to Danielle and say, she's GM right now. I could say, you know what, I just want you to run this department, and somebody else is the GM. She'd be like, whatever the company needs. Like, I'm good. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
And she would still influence the whole company from any position I put her in.
Yeah.
And that's such an example to me always of like true leaders just lead.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where they're at in the org
Yeah.
chart. And obviously they have domain and responsibility, and like you need to operate effectively inside your structure. But a true leader just starts to impact and influence everything inside of the organization. And the other thing from that book that I remember that I'll never forget, and that I use probably a couple times a month with clients, is I always remind them, if your company's here, then the leadership is stuck. If you want to get here, it's a leadership problem.
Yeah.
or if things
Yeah.
are going sideways, it's a leadership problem. Like,
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, but it's not going to be more cash. It's not going to be more people. It's not
Right.
going to be 17 new products or
Yeah.
offers. If things keep stalling out, you just have a leadership problem. So let's just work on that first.
Yeah, that's right.
So I love how he talks about, like, the law, the lid.
Yeah.
I think is what it's called, where it's like
Right.
your level of leadership ability is going to cap the organization.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm always messing with it and, like, coming to you and asking about, like, what do you think about this situation? Because the other thing that's crazy to me about leadership is it's a principle-based growth path. It's a principle-based kind of behavior thing, right? Because you can't give somebody the template for every situation.
Right.
Like, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But a true leader will figure it out and make a good result out of any situation.
Yeah.
Is what I think. And but I'm curious, what do you think are, like, and I know John Maxwell has, a gazillion different principles and stuff like that, but what do you think are maybe the top handful of principles that you follow consistently from a leadership perspective that have served you the best, and that, as you've taught so many folks leadership at this point in your life and career, what do you think are, like, the standout ones that if somebody's like, oh, leadership, like, yeah, I've heard about that, but I've never really thought about it, or how do I change or grow? Like, what would be your encouragement of where for somebody to start thinking about those things?
One of the ones that sticks out to me is the attribute of influence. And that is, no matter what your position is, what your title is, and whether you have direct reports or not, or whether you're a supervisor or whether you're the general manager, is whatever role you're in, you can influence others. And the others may be your peers by your work ethic. It may be your direct supervisor, manager, for sure. It may be a client outside the organization. And often, whether you believe it or not, people are observing that all the time. They may not talk to you and say, oh, Gabe, I want to tell you I recognize. May not.
Yeah.
But over time, you'll start to see them emulate your style if it's effective. And so influence is probably the biggest one, and it's not about title, just like we were talking about.
Yeah.
I thought initially it was, well, if I was general manager, I could do this, I could do that. You actually have less freedom the higher up you go in the organization. That's a hard thing to understand.
It's
And
true.
you're like, oh, if I was CEO, I would just do this, I would do that. Well, you probably wouldn't, you go out of business. You know?
Everything will really fall down.
Yeah,
if you
then you
operate
got a
that
real
way.
problem. Because if you think you're going to be a one-man band or whatever, that's not going to work. And so
Yeah.
effective leaders have learned that. So influence to me just sticks out so big.
Yeah.
The other one is, that strikes me as process, meaning when you think about changes, whether they're initiated within the organization or outside the organization, is how is that going to be communicated and rolled out? And here's something that I fell into early that I learned you can't do, and that is, let's say you're on a project team and you're working to resolve a company issue, and you have other people, and you're on a meeting every other week for 6 months. Now you're ready to roll out to the rest of the organization the result. So you roll it out, and then you're surprised that there are a lot of pushback questions. Yet that's the first time that group had heard anything about it, and you've been working on it for 6 straight months. And so I've been on both sides of that.
Yeah.
I've been on that, well, gosh, why would you not, I'm presenting. Why would you ask that question? Well, it's easy. They knew nothing about the project until I rolled it out, and I've been doing it full time for 6 months.
No kidding.
So that's another one, is the self-awareness to say, how's this going to roll out? Who does it impact? Does it impact me, my peers, people who report to me, people above me in the organization? Is time out before you move forward, think through what that means. And I way underestimated change impact on people for various reasons. Sometimes the pushback was out of fear. Oh my gosh, we're going to downsize the company. Or it was, oh, you're going to change my job. I don't want to do that. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I would underestimate. I'd actually get irritated. Like, come on, get with it. And over time, I learned, you know what? You got to slow down and fast forward. There's just no other way. And what was that if that was happening to me? And even when I, late in my career, I would get something handed to me, and sometimes I'd be like, wait a minute, time out. Because I really hadn't heard the whole backstory. I wasn't part of the project plan.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh, top leadership doesn't understand what that means for the organization. Well, then it's my job to explain, not push back, but to talk through with those leaders on what that impact could be. Not that you say we're not going to do it, but hey, I just want you to know, I think we need a couple more steps in the rollout to let the organization catch up with where we were.
Yeah.
So that's the other attribute, if you will, to me is, as a leader, is be process-oriented with your communication and your actions. which means you may not get it done tomorrow like you wanted,
But
which I
it'll
like
stick.
to. Yeah, I don't like waiting for anything, but you're going to be better off, and your folks will respect you more,
Yeah.
and they'll see that you're willing to take that feedback and process it. And a lot of times, I got surprised on feedback I got, and I said, "Gosh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I didn't want to say that out loud, but I was thinking,
Yeah.
man, that's a good point they raised." So then you be candid. You know what? That's a great idea. We're going to take that back to the project team. And I have found 100% of the time that makes it easier to roll out stuff. And let's face it, it's all about change. Even if it's self-inflicted change that's needed, or if the market's doing something, there's always change. If you're not changing, then your company's probably going out of business at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah, you're right. Those are two things that are really, really powerful. And like the second one, I think, is the one I always gotta feel like I gotta brush up on and be like, did I actually get everybody included? Have I had the conversations? Because I think about the story in that John Maxwell book. It's the 21 Laws of Leadership, I think, or irrefutable laws of leadership.
Right.
So I don't remember the name of the principle, but you just described it in the second thing you said. But he tells a story where I think he was at one church and he was trying to pitch some big initiative, and he just like stood up on stage and said, "Here's what we're doing," and somebody said, "No, we're not," and shut him down. He was like some young kid pastor, and some old dude in the congregation was like, "We're not doing that," and the whole initiative failed. And then I think you ended up going to another church for a different project, and then you realized, oh, I'm going to talk to all the elders, and then I'm going to meet with like the families that are the most consistent showing up and like working on projects with us. There's things here, and I'm going to go around and sell the idea to everybody.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to announce it on stage so we can have the vote to build the building or make the change or whatever it was.
Right.
And it went through flawlessly, like comparatively, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I read there, and when we did that first time through, because we probably read that book together 3 or 4 times at this point.
Yeah, right.
But I'll never forget that, and like I think that's just the real low awareness around the fact that like if you want to sell something in the organization, you're gonna have to work with people one-on-one.
Yeah.
And there's no like blast email or chat or send the video to everybody. Here's what we're doing. That's not gonna create buy-in when it impacts people's livelihood. You know, and it impacts like whatever it impacts the whole group.
Right.
And so that's something that, well, for whatever reason, that stuck. And so when I'm working on a big client project, you know, a big team, or if we're rolling something out in the company, that's crucial. Then that's what I would watch for. Is like if I want to get it done, it's gonna be really easy if I slow down to fast forward, like you say, and just meet with people and then hear their feedback, or say, hey, like, would you be willing to give this a try?
Yeah.
Even if I know that end of the day I'm not gonna be able to give them the option or try it or not, because there's cases or that. I still was like, what do you think about this? Or like approach it in a real soft manner, and then that way, when it's time to close the deal and move forward and get it done and do the big initiative, you're still gonna have a couple people that don't like it, but they feel like they were included and honored in the process, and like that you care. And that's probably the biggest leadership thing for me is I just love people. I know I super care about them. Like I appreciate them, and even somebody that I'm in the middle of conflict with. You know, at this point, fortunately, in my life and growth and development and career, I did not always act this way. I had to learn my hard lessons, but even in a situation where like having some conflict or got to work something out, I show up to the meeting to resolve the conflict and say, hey, my intention is just to serve you well. I want to show up and learn, and like I also going to apologize off the bat that if I caused any miscommunication that caused this, and then I'm sorry, that was not my intention, but I'm going to share with you my intention, speak it out loud, let you know. So then we can have the tough conversation, and at least I can show up in integrity and know that I did my best. I had a call this week with, had to help my client, who's doing really well, a great client of mine, let go of a vendor that was really dropping the ball. And we didn't come to the meeting telling them like we were going to fire him. But I opened the meeting, I was like, hey, I'm curious. I need an education on some of the stuff. My intention is just to serve you guys well with the feedback I see. And they had a whole team of people show up that didn't understand leadership, and they ended up ruining a relationship that was very salvageable because they'd made some poor decisions. And I actually said on the call, like, I feel like for the contract we've engaged with you guys for, like, we need to see some more leadership from your side. And I haven't had this experience in quite a few years, but one of the quote unquote executives or whatever big title this gal had was like, we need to level set. What do you mean by leadership? Like, you guys should just tell us what to do. And then I was like, well, if we want to do that, we can hire employees and train them ourselves and do like if I'm gonna, I want to get value from this relationship. And it was a little bit bizarre for me, because like my perspective is like, oh, everything's a leadership problem, so like we just solve it. But it was unfortunate that they just didn't understand that like they hadn't led at all, and so
Yeah.
then they just lost the whole opportunity to serve
Oh,
and the
man.
revenue obviously, and it is a solid account. I mean, it was a
Wow.
and I was there to try to mediate and resolve and build the bridges and figure out the holes and like say,
Yeah.
well, we'll take this piece back, but you guys can do this stuff for us. And they just approached it with the finger pointing and not with curiosity or
Yeah.
they didn't have self-awareness or were willing just to say like, oh, maybe we screwed it up. Like
Yeah.
I screw stuff up all the time. It's easier just to admit it than
Right.
it is to
Right.
defend like that. So yeah, that's just
That's-
it's wild stuff.
The organization will respect you. You know, there's no doubt. There's sometimes you're going to have to make a change. There's no yes or no. You'll still ask for feedback, but the key is why the change.
Right.
And can you articulate that to all levels of the organization? We had one where, in the insurance business, where for our call centers, there's a call flow. And if you've ever made a claim, you know how it works. So they're
Yeah.
reading a script. So late last year, California was implementing a new regulation. And so the California legislation said, hey, we want you to implement an additional verbiage script on the call.
Yeah.
So in the call center business, 5 seconds on a call longer than normal represents many people staffing.
Yeah.
So the role I was in was we don't want to lengthen the average.
No way.
So
costly.
as you talk about it, the organization's groaning. Everybody.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, California. But the reality is, we either do that or we run the risk of
Or
getting
don't do
fined.
business in California, right?
Yeah, and again, that's not an option. So,
Exactly.
So in that case, it was. I remember the conversations I was involved in the organization was, hey, this is a state regulation, state government regulation. We can't like say no. There might be another way to do it, which we ended up doing, to respect what they wanted, the
Yeah,
regulation.
the policies, yep.
Yeah, so we ended up doing a kind of a modified script change, but very minor, which did not hurt the average call length.
Yeah.
And so there's a case where it's happening one way or another. So then you get on the phone with the attorneys, you try to work out, hey, would we, if we did this, would that satisfy the regulation? So there are things in an organization that are going to happen where you're asking for input, but you know ultimately it's got to happen.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that never happens, but it's still, the organization will respect you if you get their input. So you totally understand the impact at whatever level the organization has impact. And then if the answer is still, we got to do this, you do it, but they will respect you for getting their input though.
Yeah, that's so true. Because then they have the opportunity at least to feel seen and heard, and like
Yeah.
that, and that you're still going to have the people that just are, stinkers about everything, and like
Yeah.
it's going to be a challenge no matter
Yeah.
what. But at least you're not going to break and lose trust with people you do have. You're going to
Right.
build it, and I think you can even build trust with the people that are complaining and are mad about it.
Yeah.
I remember when between my construction company, when I went bankrupt and lost that company, I had two jobs between that. One of them was did a turnaround. I became general manager and turned this repossession company around because they were losing money like crazy and
Okay.
needed to get it straightened out.
Yeah.
And so I got hired to straighten everything out. And I was telling my son Arliss this story the other day because he was like, this counselor at camp really annoys me, and like, I can't stand being around him. And I said, well, let me tell you a story about something that I think I know the origin of this, which is why I'm going to tell the story. But I didn't really realize the origin of this behavior or choice I made, but I just rolled with it and it worked really well, and now I use it all the time. But so repo truck drivers are tough dudes. Like they're legal criminals is like what they like to say, because they're legally allowed to come steal your car.
Yeah,
They're
right.
big tough dudes. They're usually 6'6",
Yeah.
250 to 350 pounds. Some of them, carry, which you're not allowed to do, because they're dealing in rough neighborhoods with people that don't care about what's going on. And there's plenty of people, unfortunately, that buy a car, never make a payment,
Yeah,
and just
right.
beat it up. So you're dealing with a rough crowd a lot of the time. And so repo guys are a rough crowd, or can
yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And especially this was a long time ago. This was 2007 and 8. So
Okay.
more before the internet kind of took over and you get in trouble for doing things faster because people are just going to pull out and film you. But so the top producer in the company was this guy named Jeff, and he he grew up out in the country, and so he wasn't like, you know, school educated, but he made the company like somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000 a year because he was
Wow.
far and above the top producer.
Yeah.
He was horrible with people. He was just rude and crass and mean, and long after I left, I think he ended up getting involved in some kind of harassment suit at work. Like he was not a great guy.
Okay.
But here I am, like, and I was not in great health and shape back then compared to I am now. I was probably 130 pounds wet, and he's, you know, 280 and a foot taller than me. And he walks into my office like within a week of being there, because I'm sure this is just his normal behavior, because there'd been a cycle of people not getting the job done there in my role. He walked in and started putting his finger in my chest and said, "You're not going to tell me what to do here. You kids don't know," you know, and went out with lots of colorful language. It's like, "You don't know what it's like out there, and like, you can't just make stuff up." And I said, "Hey, Jeff, can I ride with you tonight?"
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, "Oh," like I totally threw him off balance. And I'm like, "Yeah, what, can I ride with you tonight or tomorrow night?" He's like, and I can't remember if I ride him that night or next night. And he's like, "All right." Like he was totally shocked.
Wow.
So I rode around with him all night, you know, from all the rough neighborhoods to out in the country, you know, picking up cars and let him talk and like tell me about how his job was and what was hard and what the company was doing wrong and all that stuff. But I mean, I hooked up cars and did everything I was allowed to do. And I never had a problem with him ever again.
Wow.
And it just, it makes me, I was thinking about it as we were talking here, like one of the things that why I think we probably became fast friends is like, if there was a problem or a project to do, like you just dive in and did it. You weren't telling us what to do as kids, or like you weren't, you know, giving the directions and, you know, hoping to figure out. Like you always take action. And when I told that story to Arliss, because I'm like, when you're dealing with somebody that's really challenging you or like giving you problems like that, just go work alongside them. Hear them talk, let them complain, let them vent, let them process all that stuff. Because just time side by side with people in the trenches solves so much when you can do it. It's not, and as your role changes, like I don't have the time or availability to do that at every role in the company anymore for myself, but I can without question do that with anybody on the leadership team. I'm like, "Hey, I'll hang out in your calls," or like, "I'll look at the project," or like, I'll get in there and do it with you. Even if my skill level is like not even comparable to that person, the fact that I'm willing to try, it goes a long way. And so
I think that's a great point. It's one with that case you were mentioning. So now that's probably the only time a manager's ever done that with that guy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So the respect and those kind of folks sometimes may not be verbally gracious, but you've earned a lot of relation points by doing that. And plus you got a view of this is what the job's like, and maybe it's like, gosh, you know, I could see why what he's complaining about makes sense. Not always, but it could. The other part it makes me think about, and you and I have talked about this, is if you have a number of direct reporting people in your organization, they're made up of all kinds of different personalities, have all kinds of different backgrounds, and it's actually healthy to have different behavioral styles. I used to think, okay, I'm only going to hire people that mimic my personality. If you do that, you can probably sink pretty fast.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't mean it's easier. It's probably not easier, because you're going to have some folks on your team that may be hard to deal with, or maybe they're chronic pushback people. No matter what you propose, they got the 10 reasons why you can't do it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my first thought is, well, I'm just going to let that person go. I don't want them on my team.
Right.
They actually can help your team.
They'll definitely strengthen you if you're willing to work through any personality quirks, or just being uncomfortable that they always challenge you. Maybe you need that person.
You do. And many times, and I've had this experience with some of my direct reports, boy, I would leave the meeting saying, I did not think about those 3 things. And that person came up with it in 2 seconds. So it doesn't mean you let them go roughshod. And if it gets to the point where they're influencing the bigger part of the organization negatively, you got to step in. But I have found if your leadership intention is to have surround yourself with people who are just like you, that's a horrible strategy. You got to have some variety. Some people that are super analytical, maybe too much. Some people that are more people kind of people. You want a variety because you'll get more viewpoints. The other part of that coin is, are you willing, and does your team know you'll accept feedback? And I remember getting feedback, especially early on, and it did not feel good. I got, someone said, well, Doug, I did not, your communication meeting, I did not I couldn't follow you. It was too complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, I did an awesome PowerPoint. I had, all this stuff. And they're thinking,
Nailed
or I asked them, what did you take away? And they got nothing of what I thought. That
Yeah.
happens in church too, actually. But so,
Yeah.
so it's part of, it's good to get that feedback. Even stuff I noticed last couple of years, they say that when you're communicating and writing, even with the top person in the organization, it's typically best to be at the 8th grade level.
Yep.
And I'm like, really? This is a CEO that knows everything. They're like, no.
It's simpler to comprehend.
Simpler to comprehend. And now in Microsoft Word, it has things that will call that to your attention when you're doing spell checks. So,
Yeah, exactly.
But that was something else. I thought, man, I thought this was a slick presentation, but I had so many layers to it, people were just confused.
Yeah.
And when the person told me that, at first, I in my head, I'm thinking, oh man, obviously you didn't pay attention.
Right.
Afterwards, they said, I listened to the presentation, realized they were right.
Yeah.
And so that was very helpful feedback, So
Another friend and mentor of mine says he has this thing called 100-0, and he's like, in a relationship, you need to go 100% of the way. You can't be expecting the other person to like meet you halfway all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always think about that with communication.
Yeah.
If there is a miscommunication, it's on me because I didn't simplify it
Yeah.
or make it concise, or I didn't validate and say, hey, did you understand what I just said, or can I
Right.
add more detail? And
yeah,
and man, miscommunication, ineffective communication, those are the most costly errors inside
Yeah.
of businesses, and we make them all the time, but we've got to have a system and awareness to
yeah,
improve that stuff because
Yeah.
miscommunication is so expensive.
yeah. When it slows the organization down or it
Yeah.
creates turmoil that could have been avoided.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah, definitely lots of great lessons there. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you spending time
Oh, absolutely.
talking through this stuff. I'm sure we'll probably have you come back on and record sometime, but I
That'd be
value
great.
and appreciate you. You've been such an amazing mentor to me, a father figure in so many areas of my life, and just been a massive support in the business. I'll tell one more story before we close it up, but I remember 10 years ago, maybe, we were sitting on the couch at my sister's business.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And things were not good, and we were not going to make payroll for the few people we had. And
Yeah.
you just, from times like that when it was, 12 plus years ago or something like that, I don't
Yeah.
know now. You just always been a guiding force and just a calming, person to me. And I think it was cool. We got to talk about like Matt and Mike and I, like you said, we've all moved on to successful careers, and I see what Matt's up to more than Mike these days because I don't run into him as much. But
Right.
but you've just made a massive impact on so many people, and it's just so clear how you show up with your heart's intention, and you just always jump in and do the work no matter what it is. Like you're willing to sit down and figure it out and hear people out, and you're a leader that I super admire and love and appreciate. So I appreciate you taking time to do this.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I mean, it goes both ways. And to see how you've grown, even your mindset of how you approach stuff over the years has been awesome. And to me, that makes it so easy to want to connect, because here's a person that wants to learn. They've already had success, but they want to keep learning, which is another principle of leadership.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm proud of that. And I'm just thankful for one, we've had this connection. I keep laughing because it's so long. It's like 30 plus years. I'm thinking, how could that be?
It doesn't seem that long
I
in
know.
some senses.
But you know what though? Some of the other things about relationships is sometimes you have to build a new history with people. So you can't sometimes give feedback to people. You have to achieve a certain level of relationship before they're going to be open to hear that. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's weathering the tough times.
Yep.
And then you go through the trenches with somebody, and now you guys both, the two people know what they went through, and there's a level of openness now that you trust that person. You can't get it on the first day of meeting someone,
Right.
or say, I had a meeting with you, are we there? No, it's not going to happen like that.
It's a lot of time and
Yeah.
repetition.
It
Yeah.
is. It's a lifelong principle, though.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed the journey. I hope it continues for a long time. It's been a
Awesome.
blast.
Thanks, Doug.
And so best wishes for you and Rachel and your family.
Awesome.
I'm sure we'll be talking a lot as time goes on.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Hey, good thing. Thanks for having me.